God meant me to be, and I'm holding on to that whether or not everyone around me disagrees, and culture disagrees, and my family disagrees, and I feel all alone. I'm going to thine own self be true, because God is making me who thine self is. That's where we're going. And you can imagine if you'd been like that for your whole life. Think of all the things you would never have done. Think of all the things you would have done. Think of the place you'd be today. But we can dwell on the past. Let's go forward thinking, if I can figure out the answer to this question, I can go forward being strong, bold, who I am, and accomplish great things and become an awesome person. Now the story we're going to look at is in Galatians chapter 2. We looked at the story of Peter. He became very popular, and he became very influential. And as the pressure of being popular and being influential, like you could say he's like a rock star or a movie star. Everyone wanted his autograph. They're like, man, you were with Jesus for 3 years. A lot of clout, whatever, all the churches in the Roman Empire. They're like, let's check with Peter first to see if we should do this. Like, he had incredible power. Peter learned an important lesson one day. He says, don't tell these pig-eating people that they need to stop eating pigs for God to love them. God loves everyone, whether they eat pigs, cows, whether they're vegetarians, whether they eat snakes and gophers. Doesn't matter what kind of meat you eat, God loves you anyway. It's not about meat. And so Peter learned this important lesson. So then he would travel around and he'd tell people, hey, don't panic. I'm not going to tell you to stop eating pork or you have to get circumcised. I don't do that anymore because God looks at the heart. But, so he'd be hanging around with the pork-eating, uncircumcised people. But then James, the brother of Jesus, in Jerusalem, started hearing about Peter eating pork and like not washing his hands, and he would be with pork eaters, uncircumcised people in their houses, like totally being like Jesus would have been to them. But then James and some others were like, Peter, it's really, really hard to tell the people in Jerusalem about Jesus when you, the rock star, super spokesman, are like doing all these things that they just can't stomach. It makes them sick to the stomach to think of you eating pork and stuff. And it's very hard to convert them to Jesus like we want to do when you're doing that. I know it's not wrong what you're doing, but can you tone it down so that the people in Jerusalem, the good Jews, will believe in Jesus? Because you're really causing them to trip. Because they see you doing your thing. It's great, if no one knew about it. If you were nobody, sure, go ahead. But you're a somebody, so you got to tone it down. So that's what Peter was doing. And you can imagine in his mind, it made a lot of sense. And it's the same thing with a lot of the pressure we hear and we feel. We think, well, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have gone that way. But I can see your argument. I can see why that's probably a good movie. I can see why this probably isn't that bad to do. Okay, I'll give it a little bit. Kind of makes some sense. I don't, want to keep my friends, or I've met people that they watch every movie available because they want to keep on top of what people are watching, so that they can speak into people's lives about the movies they watch. So, okay, well, it makes sort of sense, but you're watching a lot of trash. So it's like Peter's like, he's kind of, okay, it makes a bit of sense. I guess I will let you influence me. I guess I will give in to this pressure because you have a good case for it. And then Paul comes in, and he's going to give us the answer to our dilemma. How can we not be so easily influenced? And how can we know who we are and who God meant us to be so that we're not waving around, floating around, and so we're not convinced by things that should not be convincing? Peter should not have been convinced by James's letter to stop eating pork with the pork eaters and the uncircumcised. He should not have been convinced by that, because he'd lost his security. And that's where we're going to go today. So this is Galatians chapter 2. All that is intro. To Galatians chapter 2, verse 11. And this is Paul writing a letter to the Galatians because the people in this city had come to Jesus. They'd become part of God's family, not by being good, but by becoming forgiven. I was talking with someone just the other day, and I said, hey, do you know what a Christian is? They go, not really. I was baptized as a baby. I said, a Christian is not a good person, it's a forgiven person. Who goes to heaven? Not good people, forgiven people. How do you get forgiveness? By being good? No, by asking God to forgive you and trusting Him. So that's what Paul was telling the people in Galatians, but then these other guys came in and they started saying, no. You want God to like you? great, forgiveness is great, but you need to get circumcised, stop eating pork, you got to start doing these temple things and these special ceremonies. So that's what Paul was writing this letter about. So like, it's kind of like if you could write a letter and then the letter jumped up, came alive, and started slapping somebody. It's like, listen to me, you are making a big mistake. That's the kind of letter it was. It was a slapping in the face letter. So at this point, he's telling a story about when Peter came to the city in Galatia. The city is called Antioch. So chapter 2, verse 11. When Cephas, Peter's other name, don't get tricked, this is Peter. When Peter, or Cephas, he has two names, some of us have more than one name, came to Antioch, the city in Galatia, where Paul was like trying to get them just to be free and worship God freely, I opposed him to his face. So Paul publicly stood up in Peter's face in front of everybody and said, you are wrong. And that's pretty gutsy. That's the kind of guy Paul was, because he knew his foundation. He stood up to his face because he stood condemned. Peter at this point wasn't like, I don't feel condemned. I'm just doing something James asked me to do, and he has a good argument for it. Paul's like, that's blankety blank. You stand condemned. You are so wrong. Here's the reason. He gives it to Peter. Verse 12. For before certain people came from James, that's like James saying, hey, stop eating pork with those guys. Like, leave those guys alone for a while. Let Paul hang out with them. Before you got that information from James, Peter, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, the pressure, the peer pressure, the societal pressure, the cultural pressure, when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision / don't eat pork / be a good Jew group. Now Peter wouldn't have said, I'm so afraid of you guys, I'm going to do what you say. He's been in far more scary situations than some guys asking him, stop eating pigs. But he was convinced by their argument. The pressure on him was enormous. And he sold out, and Paul calls it for what it is. He goes, you don't think you're afraid, but you are afraid of doing the right thing. Verse 13, the other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy. Hypocrisy means play acting. It's like, you watch a movie, and we watched the movie the other day, Changeling, and there's Angelina Jolie acting like a woman from the 1920s. Is she that woman from the 1920s? When she finishes that movie, does she go home and say, hey, I'm Christine from that 1928 movie, I'm still her? No, she goes, I'm Angelina Jolie, I was just pretending to be Christine from the movie. And so Paul is saying, Peter, you're pretending to be someone you're not. You're a hypocrite. You're an actor. And you're so good at it, others are joining in. So that by their hypocrisy, their play acting, even Barnabas, I'm not going to get into the background of that, but that's incredible. Even Barnabas was convinced by this stuff. Even Barnabas was led astray. So it's Paul in front of Peter, everyone's watching, he's like, you are wrong. And you are so wrong, you're getting everyone else to be wrong. And there's a problem with it because if everyone else is following you and your wrong ideas, the people in Galatians are starting to think, hey, Peter used to eat with us, we were all cool, it was like forgiveness is the only thing, but now he's not hanging out with us. What are we missing? How did we become second-class Christians? What should we do? And then these other guys come in and say, well, you got to get that operation. You got to stop eating, the hot dogs and stuff. And they're like, okay, I guess we're going to do that stuff because we feel like second-class Christians because Peter's treating us like one. Peter thought, I'm doing this for the benefit of the Jewish Christians in Jerusalem. But the ripple effect from that decision was affecting the entire Gentile mission for Paul. And Paul was starting to lose his audience, and he was starting to lose his momentum, and people were starting to think maybe they should get circumcised. So he stands up, condemns them in public. Verse 14, here's the answer to our question. When I, Paul, saw that they, Peter and his cohorts, were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas, Peter, in front of them all, you are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs?